During the company party, he took my wife from me in front of me and danced with her as if it were the most normal thing in the world, as if I didn't exist, as if our marriage, our history, our love were worth absolutely nothing. We were all standing, with glasses of champagne in our hands, amidst the soft sound of ambient music, when he simply extended his hand to her, and she accepted it. Without hesitating. Without looking at me. As if he had been waiting for this all night. I stood there, paralyzed, holding the glass so tightly that I heard the slight crack of the glass cracking between my fingers. The colleagues around tried to pretend they didn't notice, but the uncomfortable look said it all. They knew. They knew what that meant. And even if they didn't know the details, they knew that this was a deep cut, a public humiliation, a slap in the face of someone who trusted too much. It wasn't just a dance. It was a message. A silent and direct message: I can do anything, even your wife. She smiled. He smiled like he hadn't smiled with me in a long time. And in that smile, I realized that something inside her had left me a long time ago. Maybe she still slept in our bed, maybe she still wore my baggy t-shirt to make coffee on Sundays, maybe she still said, "I love you," when leaving for work, but her heart, her desire, her loyalty, all of that had already moved to another address. And that address had a name, badge, status, and the power to destroy my life in a nutshell. That night I walked home alone. The silence in the room seemed to mock me. Her clothes were still in the closet, but they looked like they belonged to a stranger. Perfume on the pillow, which used to be comfort, became poison. I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to understand. Where did I go wrong? At what point did I stop being the man she fell in love with? Or did she just never stop being a woman seduced by power and appearance? I remembered all the nights I worked late to ensure a better future for us, the trips I postponed, the dreams I put aside to support her and hers. I remembered all the times I defended her, even when she was wrong. And now, all I got was that dance. That damn dance. The next day, she returned home as if nothing had happened. Smiled. He kissed me on the forehead. He asked if I slept well. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab her by the shoulders and demand the truth. But I didn't. I just replied, "Yes, I slept, and you look great today." The cruelest betrayal is the one that comes disguised as normality. The one that hides behind everyday life. The one who kisses you before leaving and stabs you in the back at night. That's when I knew I needed to do something. But not just anything. I didn't just want to confront them. I wanted them to feel it. That they experienced on their skin the same bitter taste of humiliation, contempt, rejection. And so, I began my plan. A plan constructed with calm, intelligence and coolness. The kind of revenge that is not shouted, but that is savored in silence, like a wine aged in oblivion. I knew his weaknesses. I knew about the loopholes, the small administrative errors that were ignored by everyone out of convenience. I knew about the poorly explained contracts, the strange promotions, the expenses hidden in the reports. And more than that, I knew that, behind that expensive suit and the posture of an admired leader, there was a dirty man, involved in schemes that would one day, sooner or later, come to light. But he would never expect me to be the one to pull that thread. And she still thought she could play with both worlds. That she could continue being a respectable wife while giving herself into the arms of her boss. That I could go home and pretend that everything was fine, that I was just the predictable husband who would never take any action. She underestimated the silence. He underestimated the kind of pain that shapes a man. And that's what transformed me. The first piece fell when he was summoned to an extraordinary board meeting. Documents were delivered anonymously, irrefutable evidence of irregularities that called their integrity into question. The mask began to crack. The confident smile gave way to nervous looks and cold sweats. And while he tried to explain the inexplicable, my wife was called to provide clarification. After all, she had recently been promoted. Too fast. No clear justifications. The bond between them, previously invisible, now became suspicious, embarrassing, dirty. Her reaction was panic. He called me from the parking lot, crying. He said he needed to talk. That everything had gotten out of control. That things between them weren't what they seemed. That he didn't want to lose me. I listened in silence. And I hung up. For the first time, I was the one who turned my back. Before long, he was removed. The press discovered the scandal. The company's image was tarnished. Investors withdrew support. And, like a chain reaction, everything started to fall apart. The empire he commanded with arrogance began to crumble. And along with it, the reputation of the woman who betrayed me. No one wanted to be associated with the scandal couple. She lost her position. Lost his friends. Lost credibility. And most of all, he lost me. Not because I wanted to see her suffer, although a part of me did, but because she would never again have what she so easily destroyed, my trust. Years later, as she tried to rebuild the pieces of her own life, something happened. A new name appeared in my life. Someone who didn't know me for who I was, but for who I was there, at that moment. A love without a past, but full of a future. A woman who didn't need to see me as a hero, but as a man. And there, in that reunion with lightness, I realized that the revenge was over. But before all that, before the consequences, before the tears, before the exposure, there was that moment. That damn moment when he reached out his hand, and she agreed to dance with him. A seemingly simple gesture, but one that carried the weight of everything that was to come. What if I told you that, that same night, even before the scandal, before revenge even began to be plotted, something happened. Something that would change the course of this story even further. Something that no one, not even her, could ever imagine. Welcome to the channel where the truth comes out. Here, we don't romanticize betrayal. On the contrary, we condemn all forms of infidelity. The stories you will hear are fictional, but inspired by painful realities, to show how betrayal corrodes, destroys, and leaves deep scars. Get ready to dive into an intense narrative, full of real emotions, with twists and turns that will leave you breathless. Now take a deep breath, and prepare yourself. What you will hear today is a shocking story. His name was Daniel, she was Laura. Married for 7 years, they looked like those couples that inspired tranquility just by looking at them. They had their own rhythm, small gestures that revealed ancient intimacy, a connection built little by little, without rushing, almost like a sculpture shaped by time. They lived in a leafy neighborhood, surrounded by houses with simple architecture and well-kept gardens, where the smell of coffee mixed with the sound of leaves in the wind created an almost cinematic atmosphere on Sunday mornings. Daniel was a civil engineer, a methodical, discreet man, always with a calm posture and firm speech. I liked the routines, the details, the predictability of things done well. Laura, on the other hand, worked in marketing at a large company, vibrant, social, a woman with a striking presence and a wide smile, one of those who didn't go unnoticed. They completed each other, or at least that was what everyone said, and perhaps that's why the two settled into the role that time had shaped for them, without realizing that the cracks were beginning to appear where they least expected them. Their relationship was not born out of explosive love, but rather a solid friendship that blossomed with care. They started as college friends, discovered affinities, and over time they grew closer. When they decided to live together, it was a natural, almost predictable transition, like someone following a known recipe. Daniel has always valued stability, and Laura, after some romantic disappointments in the past, found him a safe haven. The discussions between them were always minimal, too civilized even, as if they both feared the depths of a true confrontation. They preferred to remain silent, retreat, bypass. They never shouted at each other, there were never slamming doors, no tears in the middle of the night. It was a peaceful love. Maybe even too much. They had well-defined routines. Daniel liked to wake up early, prepare coffee, review digital newspapers before leaving for work. Laura preferred the hustle and bustle of the late afternoon. She liked coming home after work, playing music, taking a hot shower and cooking something improvised. They shared the tasks lightly, each with their own quirks. In the eyes of others, they were an enviable couple. On social media, the records seemed perfect: trips with lush landscapes, photos in sophisticated restaurants, sincere smiles under soft lights. But the truth is rarely hidden in the places where everyone looks. Truth, sometimes, inhabits the silence of the lost gaze in the mirror, in the touch that is not repeated, in the absence that does not hurt. Laura has always been thirsty for growth. She was ambitious, passionate about her own career. He had a natural talent for communication and an attitude that inspired respect even among superiors. Little by little, she gained space in the company, becoming noticed, winning important campaigns. His eyes shone when he talked about projects, goals, and successful presentations. Daniel admired that, and never tried to contain his evolution. On the contrary, he supported every step. He was always willing to listen to your ideas, make technical suggestions when necessary, and celebrate each promotion with genuine enthusiasm. But there were times when he felt small next to her. Not out of jealousy, not out of insecurity, but out of a strange feeling of displacement, as if I were falling behind without realizing it. They talked little about feelings. They had learned to live in the practical, in the concrete, and left the emotional for moments of lightness. They rarely touched on deep questions about the future, about fears, about what they really felt about each other. They loved each other, that was for sure, but their love was dormant, packed in a box of stability that no longer opened as often. The sex was good, but predictable. The nights were peaceful, but long looks and gestures of spontaneous desire were rare. There was still affection, but the warmth seemed to have given way to security. When the company's new CEO arrived, everything changed within that environment that Laura knew so well. He brought new ideas, an aggressive stance in the market and a strong presence. His name was Thomas, a confident man, the type who knew how to walk into a room and command attention. His presence was undeniable. He quickly became involved in the most ambitious projects, restructured departments, and began working directly with some key employees, Laura among them. Initially, Daniel saw no problem. On the contrary, he was proud to know that she was being recognized by her leadership. But as the months went by, he began to realize that something had changed. Laura arrived later, dinners at home were being cancelled more frequently. The cell phone, previously left unceremoniously on the table, was now constantly facing down, often on silent. Laughter during exchanged messages became common, but always followed by generic phrases such as, "work stuff," or, "you wouldn't even understand." Daniel tried not to think too much, to convince himself that everything was fine, that it was just a phase. He trusted her. I still trusted. But an discomfort began to arise in the bottom of my stomach, a silent feeling that grew with each new detail that deviated from the norm. Despite this, he continued to invest in the relationship. He planned a small trip for two to the coast, prepared a surprise with old photos, remembered special dates. I wanted to rekindle something that I felt was fading, to bring back the lightness of the early years. Laura thanked him, hugged him, but always in a hurry. There was always an email to respond to, a call scheduled at the last minute, an appointment that appeared out of nowhere. Daniel started smiling less, sleeping late, thinking more than he should. He questioned whether it was he who was changing, or whether they were simply no longer heading in the same direction. While he was sinking in doubts, Laura shined professionally. The new campaign under his responsibility was being a success. She was praised in meetings, invited to important corporate events, and constantly photographed alongside the CEO for internal stories. Colleagues said she was the new face of the company. She looked happy. Daniel wanted to be happy for her too. But there was an invisible wall growing between them. Every day, it was as if they lived in different houses, even though they slept in the same bed. One night, upon returning from a meeting, she found a note on the dining table. It wasn't a charge, nor an outburst. It was just a reminder: "Today marks 8 years since I met you. I still remember your hair tied up, your nervous laugh, the red wine we spilled on the couch. I still remember everything. Next to it, a small box with a camera-shaped keychain, a symbol of the first gift she had given him, when they were still just friends. She smiled. A sad smile. She knew he was trying, but at that moment, she was already far away. Still, there were no arguments. There were no fights. Daniel remained the same, calm, polite, present. He didn't ask where she was when she arrived late, or who she had lunch with. It was as if he avoided any confrontation, fearing the response he might receive. Laura, in turn, felt suffocated by this silence. She wanted movement, intensity, something that would take her out of that routine. But she also felt guilty, lost between what she had and what she thought she wanted. The company party was approaching. An annual event, where everyone came together to celebrate the year's achievements. Laura, as the highlight of the moment, was chosen to speak. I was excited, nervous, but also anxious about something I couldn't name. Daniel decided to accompany her. I wanted to show support, I wanted to see her shine. Maybe there, in the midst of so many looks, he could see something he had lost. That night, as he adjusted his tie in front of the mirror, he thought about everything they had built. In the years with her. In the way she smiled with her eyes closed. In the light touch she gave when she called him on the couch. There was still love. But would it be enough? At the party, the smiles multiplied. The lights, the sound, the giveaways. Laura seemed part of a universe to which he no longer belonged. And in that room full of laughter and applause, something happened. A gesture. One moment. Something that would change the course of everything they believed to be stable. But at that point in the story, Daniel still didn't know. He still believed that everything could be saved. That there was still time. That love was enough. He just didn't imagine that same night, destiny had already chosen the exact moment in which the ground beneath his feet would begin to collapse. That night, everything seemed carefully orchestrated. The room sparkled under crystal chandeliers, waiters circulated with refined trays and the ambient sound mixed jazz classics with conversations full of promise and ambition. Laura crossed the room confidently, smiling at familiar faces, shaking hands, responding to compliments with that lightness that made her naturally captivating. She wore a long dark blue dress that highlighted her elegance, and her eyes seemed to carry an expectation that went beyond the event. Daniel, at the side, maintained a firm posture, but his attention wavered. It was as if, for the first time, he didn't feel part of the environment in which she shone with such ease. He tried to convince himself that this was just another stage in her professional success, that it was all part of the growth he had always supported. However, there was an uneasiness, a small thread of tension that grew with each laugh she let out while talking to the new CEO. During the acceptance speech, Laura received a standing ovation. He spoke with passion, with control, mentioned teammates, goals achieved, the challenges faced in the last quarter. Her speech was impeccable, and at the end of it, the CEO, Thomas, called her a key piece in the company's transformation. The applause came with force, but Daniel noticed a sparkle in her eyes when she heard that praise. A shine that wasn't just professional. It disturbed him, but he swallowed hard, smiling and clapping along with the others. After the speech, she came back to him, kissed him on the cheek and said she needed to go to the bathroom. He nodded, watching as she disappeared among the guests. A few minutes passed, and he realized that she hadn't returned. He grabbed a glass of wine and tried to distract himself by talking to a colleague, but he couldn't take his attention away from the clock. Suddenly, he noticed something in the corner of the room, a discreet movement near the outside garden. He walked with calm steps, trying to appear uninterested, but his tight chest betrayed his anxiety. As he approached the large glass windows, he saw something that made him freeze for a few seconds. Thomas and Laura were outside in the dim light, talking too closely. His hand rested on her waist. Her muffled laugh. The touch on the shoulder that went down to the arm. And then, a kiss. Quick, almost technical, but a kiss. And everything that was suspended inside Daniel collapsed right there, as if the ceiling had collapsed over his head. He returned to the hall in silence. I didn't say anything. There was no scandal. He sat at the table, stared at the glass of wine as if it were his last connection with reality. When Laura returned, fixing her hair with a slight blush on her cheeks, he just smiled. She asked if everything was okay. He said yes, he was just a little tired. Didn't confront. He didn't ask. Just watched. Because something inside him, a part that was once confidence, had been replaced by a cold emptiness, hard to name. In the following days, the routine continued. Laura seemed even more involved with her work, always busy, always with something urgent to resolve. Daniel began to notice details that had previously gone unnoticed. The extended hours, the different perfume when you arrive, the long showers, the measured apologies. The phone that rang with unknown numbers and was always answered with hurried steps to another room. Everything was subtle, carefully managed. But what hurt Daniel was not the confirmation, but the constant doubt. The space between certainty and pretense. Even in the face of everything, he still tried to maintain his dignity. I supported my tired body and family commitments, tried to keep conversations light, and made an effort not to contaminate the small moments with what I felt. But there were nights when the silence between them was so thick that they could barely breathe. They slept side by side like strangers, each facing a corner of the mattress, and sometimes, when she fell asleep, he watched her as if trying to decipher who she had become. Or maybe who she always was, and he never realized. One afternoon, Laura announced that she had an important meeting at the end of the day and that she would return later. Daniel, from the office, responded naturally. But as soon as he hung up, his chest tightened in a strange way. A restlessness. An urgency he couldn't name. He left work early, drove aimlessly for a few minutes until, driven by an involuntary impulse, he parked near the hotel that used to receive company executives. He stayed there, in the car, with the engine off and his fingers shaking on the steering wheel. He didn't know exactly what he expected to find, but something guided him. A short time later, he saw a familiar car park at the side entrance. It was her. Alone. She was wearing a different dress than the one she had left in the morning. He got out of the car looking around, with the slight tension of someone who knows he shouldn't be there. He quickly entered the hotel. He remained in the car, motionless, feeling his hands sweating, his heart racing, his mind trying to find a plausible explanation that would keep him upright. Waited. Long minutes passed until he saw another figure enter through the same door. Thomas. No badge, no CEO attitude, just a man walking into the same place where his wife was. And there was no more room for doubt. Daniel got out of the car. Not to enter. Not to confront. But to see it with your own eyes. He crossed the lobby and discreetly observed the elevator closing with the two of them inside. The floor number slowly rising on the panel. He stood there, still, swallowing his own pain, forcing himself not to scream, not to break anything, not to fall apart. After a few minutes, he returned to the car. He sat down, took a deep breath, and let the tears come. For the first time, he felt truly betrayed. Torn inside. Not because of the loss of the woman he loved, but because of the discovery that she had made silent and irreversible choices. That night he didn't come home. He wandered through the streets, entered a bar, ordered a double whiskey and stood there, in silence, observing his own reflections in each mirrored surface. I felt like I had left one world and entered another, where everything I knew had become strange, hostile, and false. But in that silent pain, something began to be born. It wasn't anger. Yet. It was a spark of something colder, steadier. An idea that would come slowly, but would take shape. Because at that exact moment, Daniel still didn't know what Thomas was hiding. I still didn't know that there was something much bigger behind that betrayal. And what he would soon discover would change everything. It was early afternoon when Daniel received a call from his old college friend, Mariana, now manager of a compliance consultancy that was providing services to the company where Laura worked. Her voice was tense, direct, charged with an urgency he had never heard before. He said he needed to meet him in person, that there was something too important to say over the phone. He agreed without hesitation, and in less than an hour the two were face to face in a discreet cafe. Mariana, normally very formal, seemed disconcerted. She took a leather folder from her bag, opened it slowly, and pushed a copy of an internal report toward him. Daniel leafed through the document slowly, reading each line as if the world was being rebuilt in front of him. The fraud that was under investigation involved financial deviations in sponsorship contracts, overbilling at internal events and transfers masked under the label of institutional actions. And in the center of the web, two names were repeated with disturbing frequency, Thomas and Laura. The penny dropped with a crushing weight. Their relationship was not just an extramarital affair. It was a strategic alliance. A union of convenience, camouflaged under the veil of desire, which also involved financial schemes. Laura wasn't just cheating on her husband, she was materially benefiting from a network of corruption with the man who was destroying his own company from within. Mariana explained that the data had been provided by an anonymous whistleblower, but everything indicated that someone on the inside, perhaps a disgruntled employee, had access to emails, receipts, and recordings. Daniel, paralyzed, felt his stomach turn as Mariana's words filled the space between them with a kind of truth that he could no longer ignore. He said that this was still under investigation, that secrecy was essential, but that he thought it was fair for him to know before the bomb exploded. That night, upon arriving home, Daniel found Laura on the couch, carefree, watching a series as if the world around her was intact. He walked over to her, without a word, and turned off the television with a dry touch of the remote. She looked at him in surprise, but without guilt. He asked if something had happened. Daniel didn't respond right away. He sat in the armchair opposite her and for a moment he just watched her. Finally, with frightening calm, he asked her if she knew what money laundering was. Laura frowned, stopped talking, tried to laugh, as if he was making a joke. But all he had to do was put the folder on the table for her smile to disappear. She didn't touch the papers. He didn't ask questions. She just looked down as if she knew she had been caught. Daniel asked how long it lasted, when she started to confuse ambition with destruction, and at what point she stopped seeing the limits. Laura tried to speak, she stammered that things had gotten out of control, that she was not what she seemed, that she had been manipulated, gradually involved, seduced by power and the promise of advancement. But Daniel interrupted with a sentence that cut the air like a blade. You weren't seduced, Laura. You chose it. She collapsed. She started crying, saying that she was afraid, that she thought he would never understand, that everything had started as a way to prove her worth, to be seen, to gain space in a world where women always needed to do twice as much to be recognized. She said that her involvement with Thomas began professionally, but that, when she realized the path he was taking, she was already too committed to back down. He said he received deposits in alternative accounts, work trips that involved illicit bonuses, gifts disguised as rewards. She knew everything. He participated in everything. And now, more than ever, I knew that the abyss ahead was inevitable. Daniel didn't scream. Nothing broke. Just got up. He told her that she didn't need to worry about him, that he was out, that he would no longer be an accomplice to what she had become. Laura begged him to listen, said she was sorry, that if she knew how to go back, she would. But he no longer believed it. Because what had been destroyed was not just her trust, but her very sense of who she was. That night, Daniel left home aimlessly, but with a single objective, to use everything he knew in the most intelligent way possible. The scandal was still about to explode, but he already knew that when it did, neither of them would emerge unscathed. What Laura didn't know was that the anonymous whistleblower who had given the documents to Mariana, was closer than she ever imagined. Laura didn't sleep that night. She spent hours sitting in the same position, staring at the wall as if waiting for an explanation to emerge from her, a redemption that would not come. Her face, still wet with dried tears, reflected the collapse of everything she had built, or thought she had built. The house seemed quieter than ever, and the emptiness left by Daniel's absence was almost physical, as if part of the air had been taken away. She tried to reread the documents left on the table, as if she could reinterpret them and find some loophole in them, some sign of innocence. But there it was, too clear, too sharp. Every line, every piece of data, every hidden transaction. The evidence was indisputable, and worse, Daniel was now part of it. Not as an accomplice, but as a witness, as a direct victim of a truth that she herself dug with her own hands. Daniel, in turn, was driving aimlessly when his cell phone vibrated. It was Mariana. The allegations were about to become public. The consultancy had decided to break the institutional silence and hand over everything to the authorities before the press took the lead. The documents were now in the hands of the public ministry and the first investigation warrants would be executed at dawn. Mariana hesitated when mentioning that one of the names in evidence was Laura. There were images, recorded conversations, financial transactions that crossed accounts linked directly to her. The case was more serious than it seemed at first. Daniel heard everything with bitter lucidity. I no longer felt anger, just a cold weight, a moral exhaustion. I felt that the worst thing was no longer the betrayal, nor the revealed corruption, but the lack of clean choices from then on. He knew the exposure would be devastating. The company would try to absolve itself of blame by handing over everyone involved. Laura's image would be ruined, and Thomas's would be pulverized. But there was something even more complex nagging at his mind. She deserved to pay. There was no doubt about that. But how far would he be willing to see this happen? How much of his pain was he willing to convert into destruction? Because he knew every detail of her life. I knew about the dreams, the vulnerabilities, the professional frustrations that accompanied her for years. He knew how despised she felt in environments dominated by male egos, how she always had to prove twice as much to get the minimum. None of those things justified what she did. But it made the tragedy more human, more cruel in its nuances. While reflecting, Daniel received another message. This time from an unknown number. Just one sentence, "You won. I hope you're satisfied." He knew who it was. Thomas. The man who, with a smile and a wave of his hand, had begun to destroy everything he had spent years building. There was irony in those words, but also a dose of truth. He had won. And yet, I felt nothing close to satisfaction. The scandal broke the next morning. Headlines appeared on news portals, with blurred photos, names still unconfirmed, but the buzz was already overwhelming. Inside the company, the atmosphere was one of witch hunting. Emergency meetings were called, social media profiles began to be deactivated, doors were slammed shut. Thomas didn't show up. Laura was called by the board, but left through the back door. The team's gaze, previously admired, was now suspicious and judgmental. The fall was underway, and it was irreversible. Alone at home, after voluntarily handing over her cell phone and notebook to the audit team, Laura sat in her room and called Daniel. He answered in silence. She started by saying that she didn't want to justify it, that there were no excuses, but that she needed to say something. He asked for forgiveness. Not for betrayal. But for letting ambition destroy your ethics, your dignity, and their love. She said that, at some point, she began to confuse admiration with power, attention with affection, and that when she realized it, she was already too involved. She begged him not to let her fall alone, that even if he couldn't love her anymore, he wouldn't let her be swallowed alive by the system that swallowed her inside. Daniel listened to everything with his eyes fixed on the horizon. When he hung up, he took a deep breath. I felt a knot in my stomach. Because deep down, he knew that that moment was a turning point not only for her, but for him as well. And now, he needed to decide what he would do with what he knew. With the power he had in his hands. With the choice between justice and revenge. On the same day, amidst the dust that the scandal raised, a new presence appeared on Daniel's path. A discreet lawyer, who had been hired by the consultancy to follow the case. Her steady eyes, the serene way she spoke, the way she listened without interrupting, everything about her brought a strange feeling of peace. They talked for hours, initially just about the process, but then about the pain, about losses, about new beginnings. There was something in her eyes that Daniel hadn't seen in a long time, real listening, without judgment. She didn't ask what he felt as if it were protocol, she wanted to know because she also carried her own pain. As Laura's world crumbled under formal accusations, as Thomas disappeared from the news and became persona non grata in the corporate world, Daniel, for the first time, began to glimpse something beyond destruction. A fresh start perhaps. Not immediate. Not perfect. But real. And yet, there was one last decision to be made. Because the legal system would do its part. But the moral, intimate, personal decision was still open. And Daniel knew that whatever he chose, it would reveal more about who he would become than about who Laura was. The courtroom was silent, despite the hustle and bustle outside. The trial of the corporate scandal had become headlines in newspapers and opinion programs, and those involved began to be recognized on the streets not for the positions they held, but for the crimes they committed. Laura sat before the judge with a haggard posture, a loose blazer over her shoulders and her face visibly tired, aged not by time, but by the weight of the choices she made. She was convicted for her active participation in the fraud, for covering up illicit financial transactions and profiting from them. He received a significant sentence, with progression only after the return of part of the amounts received in his parallel account. She left the courtroom without looking back, surrounded by reporters, without a single word of defense. The shine that accompanied her in her successful times was now just a shadow in the memory of those who saw her shine too brightly, too quickly. Thomas was arrested days before the trial, in a discreet operation coordinated by the federal police after unsuccessful attempts to flee the country. His name was deleted from the company's website, contracts were annulled, and he came to symbolize the type of leader who rises quickly, stepping on everyone and, in the end, is swallowed up by his own arrogance. Reports of his involvement with other employees began to emerge, outlining a pattern of manipulation and abuse of power that, until then, had remained hidden beneath the facade of charisma. In the cell, according to close sources, Thomas spent most of the time in silence, avoiding any type of interaction, as if he was digesting not only the public defeat, but the realization that, without prestige, he was nothing. Daniel watched everything from afar, present at the necessary moments, but never at the center of the chaos. He became a key witness in the investigation, collaborating with prosecutors with documents, emails, and recordings that helped consolidate the case. He did it without hatred, without haste, just with the firmness of someone who had been hit by something greater than a marital error. For the first time, he understood that justice is not about shouting louder, but about acting when no one expects it. After the process ended, he moved to another state, sold the house where so many memories were built and buried, and took on a new position at a medium-sized construction company, where anonymity became his way of breathing again. There, he found peace in the details, in the simple routines and in the absence of dissonant voices. Months later, he met Clara, the consultancy's lawyer, again in a cafe where they both used to work on quiet days. She recognized his face before he saw her, and the smile that formed between the two was not that of someone who had found each other by chance, but of someone who had never truly lost their way. They started with casual conversations, but time transformed that into something stronger, deeper. Clara was not interested in idealized versions, but in who Daniel was there, with his scars exposed and the courage to face them. She didn't want to rebuild him, she wanted to know him whole, the way he had become. By her side, Daniel learned that it was not necessary to forget what he suffered, but to understand that some pains do not break us, they only shape us for something better. Laura, in turn, spent the first few months in lockdown reflecting on everything she had lost. She tried to keep her distance from television and the news, but the forced isolation revealed truths that she avoided facing, how much her identity was mixed with the position she held, and how much her need for approval led her to cross boundaries that should never have been touched. In his cell, he wrote letters that he never sent, to his parents, to friends who disappeared, to Daniel. Letters in which he tried to explain, not redeem himself. It was as if, when writing, he was trying to rescue fragments of what had been before everything. She later asked to be transferred to a re-education program, where she taught classes for inmates who wanted to learn communications and marketing. There, between cold walls, he found a strange kind of purpose. There was no admiration, no spotlights. Just silent attention from women who saw in her a story of rise and fall, and listened because they knew the fall was real. Years later, already on parole, Laura began to live modestly, away from the business circuit. He tried to contact Daniel only once, with a letter that was not answered. In him, there was no more hurt. But there was no space either. Time had reordered everything. And she understood that forgiveness didn't necessarily come with a return. He just came with the peace of having faced his own mistakes head-on. Daniel, now in a different rhythm of life, began writing a book about corporate integrity and power relations. The story did not contain real names, but it was impossible not to recognize, between the lines, the contours of everything he experienced. Clara encouraged him, reviewed the texts, and sometimes smiled at passages that revealed the intensity of pain transformed into reflection. On quiet nights, he watched her while she read, and realized how life can surprise even those who have lost everything. There was love there, but a different love than in the past, calmer, firmer, freer. And if there was a lesson in all of that, perhaps it was this: it's not the betrayal that destroys, but what we choose to do with it. Some get lost, others get revenge. But few transform pain into silent strength, and choose, in the end, not just to survive, but to start over. Now tell us, what did you think of this story? Would you have done differently in Daniel's place? Do you think Laura deserved that ending? Leave your comment, we really want to know your opinion. And of course, if you enjoy impactful stories like this, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any. Here, we do not support any type of betrayal. Our stories are fictional, but they bring painful truths about the real consequences of disloyalty. Until the next story.